Hey, sleepers! Tonight we're going into the deep freeze. Imagine a stillness so profound it transcends time. A quiet cold that holds a dream of a future dawn. We are in a small room in the year 1967. The air is thick with anticipation and a strange, quiet hope. A man has just taken his last breath, but for the small group of pioneers around him, this is not an end. It is the beginning of a great, uncertain experiment. A journey into the unknown. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. We love to see where our stories are reaching, so please feel free to share your city or country and the local time in the comments below. It's a wonderful way to feel connected, knowing we are all listening together under different skies. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and get ready to drift off as we explore the story of the man who chose to wait for the future. Let's begin our story, not with the cold, but with a man full of life and the world that shaped him. His name was James Hiram Bedford. He was born in the year 1893. To truly grasp the world he entered, we have to let our minds drift back. Imagine a time when the hum of electricity was a novelty, a luxury for the wealthy in bustling cities. The night was truly dark, illuminated by gaslight and candles. The primary mode of transportation was the horse and buggy, the rhythm of hooves on dirt roads, the soundtrack of daily life. The telephone was a strange new invention, a curiosity that few people had in their homes. News traveled slowly, by letter and by newspaper, taking days or weeks to cross the country. This was the world that welcomed James Bedford. As a young boy, he would have witnessed the dawn of the automotive age, the first sputtering, noisy cars, scaring the horses and thrilling the children. As a young man, he would have read about the Wright brothers and their fantastical flying machine, an idea that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. He lived through the First World War, a conflict that transformed the world with its terrifying new technologies of machine guns, tanks, and chemical warfare. He saw the Roaring Twenties, a decade of unprecedented economic prosperity, cultural dynamism, and social change, followed by the crushing despair of the Great Depression in the 1930s. He saw the world plunged into darkness again during the Second World War, a conflict that ended with the unleashing of the atomic bomb, a power so immense it seemed humanity had stolen fire from the gods themselves. Think of the sheer scale of technological and social acceleration he experienced. A person born in a world of horses lived to see men orbit the earth in spaceships. A person who grew up with letters as the main form of distance communication lived to see live television, broadcasts from across the globe. This constant, relentless wave of progress must have instilled in him a profound sense of possibility. It would have been easy for him to believe that there were no limits to human ingenuity. If humanity could conquer the skies and split the atom, surely, one day, it could conquer its own biology. He wasn't a physicist or a chemist, the kind of scientist you might picture tinkering with the building blocks of the universe. He was a professor of psychology at the University of California. His chosen field was the human mind, its complexities, its motivations, its fears, and its aspirations. He spent his career studying people. He co-authored a book titled Vocational Interests of High School Students, a practical guide to help young people find their purpose and their place in the world. He was interested in helping people live better, more fulfilling lives. This interest in a life well lived naturally evolved as he grew older into a fascination with the idea of a longer life. He was not just an academic confined to a dusty office. He was a man with a deep zest for the world. He was an avid traveler, exploring Africa and South America, venturing into places that were, at the time, still considered remote and exotic. He documented his journeys, not just with a camera, as he was a skilled photographer, but also in books he wrote about his experiences. He wanted to see everything, to learn everything, to experience as much as this world had to offer. He was, by all accounts, a man who truly loved being alive. This profound love for life is the key to understanding his final, extraordinary decision. It wasn't a morbid obsession with death that drove him, but rather a powerful, unyielding desire for more life, more experience, more wonder. Then, in the mid-1960s, the progress he had witnessed his entire life seemed to fail him. He was diagnosed with kidney cancer. In that era, the medical landscape was vastly different from today. A cancer diagnosis was often a death sentence, swift and merciless. The sophisticated treatments we now have, chemotherapy tailored to specific cancers, immunotherapy that harnesses the body's own defenses, precision radiation, were the stuff of pure science fiction. The doctors did what they could, but the cancer was aggressive. It metastasized, spreading from his kidneys to his lungs. It was declared terminal. For most people, this news would mark the beginning of an end. It would be a time for reflection, for settling affairs, for saying farewells, for making peace with the inevitable. But James Bedford, the man who had seen the impossible become reality time and time again, began to search for a different path. He was not ready for his story to end. He started to explore the fringes, the experimental theories, the radical ideas that existed on the very edge of scientific understanding. And in his search, he encountered a concept that spoke directly to his faith in the future. It was a strange and controversial idea called cryonics. He learned that a group called the Life Extension Society, one of the first organizations dedicated to this idea, was looking for a volunteer, someone willing to be the first. James Bedford, the psychology professor, the world traveler, the man who loved life, raised his hand. He revised his will, leaving $100,000, a very significant sum, in 1967, to fund the research and the procedure for his own cryopreservation. He was volunteering to become patient zero in the longest, coldest, and most audacious experiment in human history. A bridge of faith between the medicine of his time and the medicine of a future he could only imagine. So, let us take a gentle step back and truly understand this idea that so captivated James Bedford. What, precisely, is cryonics? At its most basic level, it's an idea built on a simple observation that is familiar to all of us. Cold preserves things. We see it in nature. In the frozen tundra of Siberia, ancient mammoths have been discovered, preserved for tens of thousands of years in the permafrost, their skin, hair, and even muscles remarkably intact. We use this principle in our daily lives. If you leave a fresh piece of fish on the kitchen counter, bacteria will quickly go to work, and within a day, it will spoil and decay. But if you place that same piece of fish in your freezer, you can store it for months. The cold doesn't destroy the fish. It dramatically slows down the chemical and biological processes of decay. Cryonics is the logical, albeit extreme, extension of this principle. The goal of cryonics is not just to slow down decay, but to stop it completely. To press a definitive pause button on all biological activity. The temperature required for this is far beyond that of a household freezer. The target temperature for cryonic preservation is approximately -196 degrees Celsius, which is minus 321 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the boiling point of liquid nitrogen, an element that makes up most of the air we breathe. At this extreme temperature, the world of chemistry changes. The molecular vibrations that drive all biological processes, from the beating of a heart to the firing of a neuron to the decomposition of a cell, effectively cease. The body is placed into a state of suspended animation, a profound stasis where time, for all biological purposes, stands still. The central philosophy of cryonics rests on a crucial re-evaluation of what it means to be dead. Proponents of cryonics, often called cryonicists, argue that our definition of death has always been relative to our medical technology. A century ago, if a person's heart stopped beating and they stopped breathing, they were considered irreversibly dead. There was nothing to be done. Today, we have CPR, defibrillators, and adrenaline. We can restart a heart. We can bring people back from a state that was once considered the absolute final end. The line has moved. Cryonicists are simply making a bet that this line will continue to move in the future. They propose a concept called information theoretic death. The idea is this: a person is not truly, irreversibly dead until the information that constitutes their mind and personality has been destroyed. This information, they argue, is stored in the physical structure and chemical makeup of the brain, in the intricate web of trillions of connections between neurons. As long as that structure is preserved, even if the person is clinically dead and the brain is not functioning, the information is still there. Think of it like a computer with a smashed screen and a dead battery. The computer doesn't work, but the data on the hard drive might still be perfectly intact. If you could repair the computer or put the hard drive in a new machine, you could recover the data. In this analogy, the cryopreserved person is the computer with the dead battery. The disease they died from and the damage from the preservation process itself are the broken parts. The cryopreservation is the act of saving the hard drive before it gets wiped. The hope, the core belief of the entire field, is that future medical technology will be the ultimate repair shop. They envision a future with technologies so advanced, like fleets of medical nanorobots or advanced regenerative techniques, that they can meticulously repair the damaged cells, cure the original disease, and reboot the preserved brain, bringing the person back to life with their memories and personality intact. So, in the eyes of a cryonicist, a cryopreserved individual is not a corpse. They are a patient with a condition that is, for now, incurable. That condition is what we currently call death. Cryonics, then, is not seen as an alternative to burial. It is seen as an extension of emergency medicine. It's the ultimate ambulance ride to a hospital that hasn't been built yet, staffed by doctors who haven't been born yet, using technologies that haven't been invented yet. It is a profound expression of optimism, a message in a bottle cast into the vast ocean of time, with the hope that someone on a distant shore will have the knowledge and the compassion to open it. This was the powerful, speculative, and deeply hopeful idea that James Bedford staked his future on. Let us now return to that small room in a nursing home in Glendale, California. On January 12, 1967, the day has since been named Bedford Day by those in the cryonics community, a day of solemn remembrance and a celebration of this audacious first step. But on that day, there was no sense of celebration. There was only a palpable tension, a sense of urgency, and the heavy weight of venturing into the complete unknown. James Bedford, the 73-year-old psychology professor, had drawn his last breath. His heart had stopped beating. A physician officially pronounced him legally dead. His long and painful battle with cancer was over. And for the small, dedicated team assembled at his bedside, a different kind of battle had just begun. A race against the clock. The moment the heart stops pumping oxygenated blood throughout the body, a process called ischemia begins. Cells, especially the incredibly delicate and energy-hungry cells of the brain, are starved of the oxygen they need to survive. Within minutes, this oxygen deprivation starts to cause damage, a cascade of cellular breakdown that, if left unchecked, will become irreversible. The first task of the cryonics team was to get Bedford's body on life support, even after he was legally dead, to restart circulation and breathing artificially to deliver oxygen and hopefully mitigate some of this initial damage. The team that gathered for Bedford was not a group of seasoned medical specialists with years of training in this procedure. Such people did not exist. This had never been done on a human being before. They were a small, passionate, and somewhat eclectic group of early cryonics believers. The man leading the charge was Robert Nelson. Nelson was not a doctor or a research scientist. He was a TV repairman by trade, a fact often used by critics to dismiss the effort as amateurish. But this also speaks to the grassroots, pioneering spirit of the movement. Nelson was a man captivated by an idea. He had read Robert Ettinger's book. He had become the president of the Cryonics Society of California, and he had promised Bedford he would be there. He was a man of his word, about to attempt something extraordinary with very limited resources. He was joined by Dr. Dante Bruno, an Italian physician and biophysicist who had been experimenting with cooling and resuscitation in animals. Dr. Bruno was meant to provide the medical expertise, to oversee the more technical aspects of the procedure. Also present was Robert Prehota, a chemist and author who had written about the science of life extension. This was the core team, a TV repairman, a doctor, and a chemist, united by a shared radical vision. The procedure they were about to perform was based more on theory and hope than on any established, peer-reviewed protocol. It was a first draft, improvised with the tools they had on hand in a non-clinical setting. The first critical step was to combat the formation of ice. As we've discussed, ice crystals are the great enemy of preservation, acting like microscopic daggers that shred cells from the inside out. To prevent this, the team needed to perfuse Bedford's body with a cryoprotectant agent. This involves circulating the agent through the bloodstream to replace the water in the body's cells. The cryoprotectant they had was dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO. This was a very early, and by modern standards, extremely crude choice. It offered some protection against ice, but it was also highly toxic to cells. They began the process of perfusion, but they immediately ran into problems. Dr. Bruno, the physician who was supposed to lead the medical side, didn't show up on time. The team had to improvise. They injected Bedford with heparin to prevent his blood from clotting, and then began the perfusion with DMSO. The process was rushed and incomplete. It's widely believed that they were only partially successful in perfusing his upper body, with the brain being the main priority. The lower half of his body likely received little to no cryoprotectant, meaning it would have frozen solid, suffering extensive ice damage. After the partial perfusion, the cooling process began in earnest. They used a bed of dry ice, frozen carbon dioxide, to gradually bring his body temperature down over a period of a couple of days. Finally came the last step, the transfer to long-term storage in liquid nitrogen. Bedford was placed into a simple, insulated container, a sort of foam-insulated capsule that looked more like a shipping container than a piece of sophisticated medical equipment. This capsule was then filled with liquid nitrogen, bringing his temperature down to that stable, silent state of minus 196 degrees Celsius. There he would remain, a silent monument to a futuristic dream, the first man to be cryogenically preserved. The whole affair was fraught with challenges and imperfections. In the days and weeks that followed, Robert Nelson, the TV repairman, became the de facto custodian of the world's first cryopreserved human. He stored Bedford's capsule in a garage in Chatsworth, California. He had to personally ensure it was kept topped up with liquid nitrogen, a constant and expensive responsibility. Over the next few years, Bedford's frozen form was moved several times from one makeshift facility to another, a strange, nomadic existence after death. At one point, his wife and son, concerned about the rising costs and the sustainability of Nelson's shoestring operation, won a court order to have him moved to a professional cryostorage facility in Phoenix, Arizona. Finally, in 1982, he was transferred to the care of the Alcor Life Extension Foundation, where he remains to this day. The procedure was flawed, rushed, and performed by amateurs, but it was a beginning. It proved that, on a basic level, it could be done. It was the first data point, the first chapter in the long, cold, and deeply controversial story of cryonics. To truly understand the audacity of the Bedford experiment, we must immerse ourselves in the unique cultural atmosphere of the 1960s. It was a decade of incredible contrasts, of deeply held traditions clashing with radical new ways of thinking. It was the height of the Cold War, a time of existential anxiety, but it was also the peak of the space race, a time of boundless technological optimism. The race to the moon between the United States and the Soviet Union captured the world's imagination. It created a powerful cultural narrative that with enough brainpower, resources, and national will, humanity could achieve anything. If we could walk on the moon, why couldn't we conquer death? This was the fertile intellectual ground from which the strange new flower of cryonics began to grow. The intellectual godfather of this new movement was a man named Robert Ettinger. He was a college professor of physics and mathematics from Michigan, a veteran of World War II who had been seriously wounded in battle. His experiences with medicine and mortality likely influenced his later work. In 1962, he self-published a manuscript that would become the foundational text of cryonics, The Prospect of Immortality. 2 years later, it was picked up by a major publisher and introduced his radical ideas to a wider audience. Ettinger's argument was not emotional or mystical. It was presented as a cool, rational, logical proposition. He laid out the case we'd discussed, that death is a process, not an event, and that our definition of irreversible is relative to our current technology. He introduced the concept of the freezer ambulance, arguing that cryopreservation was a medical treatment, a way of getting a patient to a future hospital. His core argument was a kind of philosophical wager. He reasoned that if you choose traditional burial or cremation, your chances of being revived are exactly zero. If you choose cryopreservation, your chances may be small, perhaps very, very small, but they are greater than zero. Given the potential prize of a second life, an extended existence filled with new experiences, he argued that any non-zero chance was worth taking. From a purely logical game theory perspective, he presented cryonics as the only sensible choice. Ettinger's book was a spark in a dry field. It ignited the imaginations of a small but dedicated subculture of thinkers, futurists, scientists, and ordinary people who were dissatisfied with the finality of death. They began to form societies and clubs to discuss these ideas. The first was the Life Extension Society, ILES, founded by a man named Evan Cooper in 1964. Soon after, other groups like the Cryonics Society of New York and Nelson's Cryonics Society of California sprang up. These were not large, well-funded scientific institutions. They were grassroots organizations, often run out of people's homes. They communicated through mimeographed newsletters, held meetings in living rooms, and engaged in passionate debates about the logistics and philosophy of a technology that was still entirely theoretical. They were dreamers and builders, trying to figure out how to construct the lifeboats that Ettinger had written about. The scientific and medical establishment, however, was almost universally dismissive. To the vast majority of mainstream biologists, physiologists, and doctors, the idea of cryonics was pure fantasy. They understood, far better than the enthusiasts, the catastrophic damage that freezing inflicts on the delicate, complex architecture of living tissue. They saw the proposal not as a scientific possibility, but as a form of wishful thinking, a pseudoscience that preyed on the most basic human fear. There were no peer-reviewed studies on human cryopreservation. There was no government funding for research. Cryonics was relegated to the absolute fringes of scientific discourse, viewed with a mixture of ridicule and contempt. It was often lumped in with other fringe beliefs like UFOs or paranormal phenomena. Into this contentious environment stepped James Bedford. His decision to be cryopreserved was the moment the movement had been desperately waiting for. It was the fulcrum on which the idea pivoted from pure theory to messy practice. It was no longer just a thought experiment in a book. It was a real person, a real body, a real attempt. The Bedford preservation dragged the concept of cryonics, kicking and screaming, out of the philosophical salons and into the harsh light of reality. It was reported in major publications like Newsweek and the New York Times. For the first time, the general public was confronted with the tangible, bizarre reality of the idea. A man was currently frozen solid, waiting for the future to come and wake him up. This event galvanized the fledgling cryonics community. It gave them a focal point, a story to tell. It directly inspired Robert Nelson to formalize his society and Robert Ettinger to found his own, the Cryonics Institute, which would go on to become one of the major players in the field. It marked the true beginning of cryonics as a service, an actual practice, not just an intellectual curiosity. But the amateurish, chaotic nature of Bedford's preservation also provided endless ammunition for its critics. The stories of the TV repairman, the makeshift equipment, and the storage in a garage cemented the image of cryonics as a fringe, unprofessional, and slightly ghoulish endeavor in the minds of many. This perception problem, born in those first chaotic days of 1967, is something the field has struggled to overcome ever since. While the dream of cryonics is poetic and its philosophy is intriguing, the scientific reality is a landscape of colossal challenges. The obstacles to successfully reviving a cryopreserved person are so immense, so numerous, and so profound that many mainstream scientists consider them to be fundamentally insurmountable. Let's gently explore these hurdles, not with complex jargon, but with some simple analogies to grasp the sheer, staggering scale of the problem. The first and most infamous villain in this story, as we know, is ice. The freezing injury caused by ice crystals is devastating. Think of a human cell, not as a simple water balloon, but as a miniature city. The cell membrane is the city wall. Inside, you have power plants, mitochondria, factories, ribosomes, a transportation network, the endoplasmic reticulum, and a city hall containing the master blueprints, the nucleus with its DNA. When water freezes, the sharp, jagged ice crystals tear through this delicate infrastructure. They puncture the city walls, demolish the power plants, and shred the blueprints. Thawing the cell doesn't magically fix this devastation. You are left with a microscopic ruin. The early cryonics tried to fight this with cryoprotectants like DMSO. Modern cryonics uses a much more advanced process called vitrification, which we will explore later. But even with vitrification, which aims to prevent ice crystals by turning the water into a glass-like solid, a second major problem arises: toxicity. The high concentrations of chemicals needed to achieve vitrification are, themselves, toxic to cells. It's a cruel catch-22. You need the chemicals to prevent the mechanical damage from ice, but the chemicals themselves cause biochemical damage. It's like trying to save a precious manuscript from a fire by soaking it in acid. You might prevent it from burning, but you've introduced a new form of destruction. Perfecting a non-toxic vitrification solution that can work on a whole human body is one of the holy grails of cryobiology. A third, less discussed, but equally serious problem is thermal stress. As an object gets very, very cold, it shrinks. This is a basic law of physics. The problem is that different parts of the human body, with their different compositions of bone, fat, and muscle, shrink at slightly different rates. As a body is cooled down to minus 196 degrees Celsius, this differential shrinking creates immense internal tension. Eventually, that tension can be released in the form of large-scale fractures. It's similar to how a glass might crack if you pour boiling water into it too quickly. The inside and outside expand at different rates. In the case of cryonics, the body can literally crack. This has been observed in later patients and is a major engineering problem that organizations are still trying to solve. But all of these challenges pale in comparison to the ultimate challenge: the brain. The human brain is the most complex structure known to exist in the universe. It contains roughly 86 billion neurons. Each of those neurons forms connections, or synapses, with thousands of other neurons. The total number of connections is estimated to be in the hundreds of trillions. It is in this impossibly intricate, three-dimensional web of connections, the connectum, that everything that makes you, you, is stored. Your memories of childhood, your ability to speak, your love for your family, your sense of humor, your personality, your very consciousness. For cryonics to be considered a success, it's not enough to just reanimate a functioning biological body. You have to bring back the person. This means preserving the connectum with near-perfect fidelity. This is where the scale of the problem becomes almost incomprehensible. The slightest disruption, a tiny ice crystal severing a key connection, a small amount of chemical damage altering the strength of a synapse, could irrevocably alter or erase a memory, a skill, or a part of one's personality. Reviving a brain is not like restarting a computer. It is like trying to reassemble a single specific sandcastle after a tsunami has washed over it, using only the sand from the entire beach. Proponents of cryonics acknowledge these monumental hurdles. Their hope lies entirely in speculative future technologies. The most commonly cited solution is molecular nanotechnology. They envision a future where we can build fleets of programmable, microscopic robots, no larger than a blood cell. These nanobots would be injected into the thawed body. Working together by the trillions, they would swarm through the damaged tissues, acting as a microscopic repair crew. They would stitch together torn cell membranes, rebuild destroyed organelles, and most incredibly, meticulously reconstruct the neural pathways of the brain, perhaps guided by an advanced artificial intelligence that has scanned the preserved structure. This is, for now, pure science fiction. We are nowhere close to building such machines. The entire enterprise of cryonics is therefore a wager. A bet that future generations will not only invent these godlike technologies, but will also be motivated to use them to repair and revive people from their distant past. The scientific cliffs are sheer and high, and our current climbing gear is rudimentary at best. Beyond the colossal scientific challenges, the practice of cryonics opens a Pandora's box of profound ethical questions. These are not simple problems with easy answers. They are deep, complex dilemmas that force us to confront our most fundamental beliefs about life, death, fairness, and what it means to be human. Let's gently wander through this thorny landscape and consider some of the questions that philosophers, bioethicists, and theologians have grappled with for decades. The first and most immediate ethical issue is that of informed consent. In medicine, informed consent is a sacred principle. A patient must be told, in clear terms, the nature of a procedure, its potential risks, its likely benefits, and the available alternatives. They must be of sound mind and free from coercion when they make their decision. Can anyone truly give informed consent for cryopreservation? Critics argue that it's impossible. How can you be informed about a procedure whose outcome is completely unknown and whose success relies entirely on technologies that do not exist? The pioneers who preserved James Bedford were operating on little more than a hopeful hypothesis. They could not tell him his chances of being revived, because the chance was, and still is, effectively zero with today's technology. They were offering a possibility, a dream. Is it ethical to allow someone, especially someone in the vulnerable position of facing a terminal illness, to spend a fortune on what is, by any objective measure, a speculative experiment? Some ethicists, like Dr. Arthur Kaplan of New York University, have argued that this preys on the fear of death and sells a product, immortality, that it cannot deliver. On the other hand, proponents argue for individual autonomy. They contend that as long as the experimental nature and the low probability of success are clearly and honestly communicated, a rational person should have the right to choose what happens to their body. They have the right to take that chance, however slim, because the alternative, conventional burial or cremation, offers no chance at all. This leads us to a deeper ethical puzzle, the very definition of death and the nature of personal identity. Cryonics creates a new, liminal state of being, a person who is legally dead, but whom proponents consider to be a patient in stasis. This challenges many religious and philosophical traditions. Some see death as a natural, necessary, and even sacred part of the life cycle, and view cryonics as an act of profound hubris, an attempt by mortals to unnaturally seize an immortality that does not belong to them. They might ask profound questions. What happens to the soul or the consciousness of a person held in this frozen state? Even from a secular perspective, the problem of personal identity is immense. Let's imagine for a moment that revival is successful. A person frozen in the 21st century is brought back to life in the 25th century. Are they truly the same person? This is a modern-day version of the classic philosophical puzzle known as the Ship of Theseus. If a famous ship is kept in a harbor, and over the centuries, every single one of its wooden planks is replaced one by one, is it still the same ship at the end? Similarly, if a person's body is repaired molecule by molecule by nanobots, and their brain's connections are meticulously reconstructed, is the resulting consciousness the same one that existed before? Or is it a new, perfect copy? Would you feel like you, or would you be a new being with the memories of a person long gone? There is no scientific answer to this question of what makes you you. Then there is the powerful ethical argument concerning social justice and resource allocation. Cryopreservation is an expensive endeavor. The initial procedure can cost anywhere from $30,000 for a neuropreservation, preserving only the head, to over $200,000 for a whole body preservation. On top of that, there are ongoing fees to maintain the preservation indefinitely. Critics ask, is it morally justifiable to spend such vast sums on a speculative procedure for a single, often wealthy, individual, when those same resources could provide life-saving vaccines, clean water, or basic health care for thousands of living people in desperate need? This argument frames cryonics as a luxury of the rich, a stark example of global inequality. It raises the specter of a future society divided not just by wealth, but by mortality itself. A world where the rich can choose to live forever, while the poor must accept death. The counterargument, again, centers on individual liberty. Proponents argue that people have the right to spend their own money as they wish. We don't typically legislate how people spend money on yachts or fine art. Why, they ask, should we prevent them from spending it on a chance at a longer life? This clash between collective good and individual freedom lies at the heart of the ethical debate over cryonics. The ripples from James Bedford's decision in 1967 spread far beyond the realms of science and ethics, creating complex legal and social challenges that our society is still struggling to comprehend. Our legal systems are built on precedents and established facts. They are designed to manage the world as it is, not a speculative future. Cryonics, by its very nature, operates in a legal twilight zone, a gray area that our current laws of property, identity, and personhood were never designed to address. The most fundamental legal problem is the prerequisite that a person must be pronounced legally dead before the preservation process can begin. This is a practical necessity. To perform these procedures on a living person would be considered homicide. But this creates a profound legal paradox. Once you are legally dead, you cease to be a person in the eyes of the law. You lose all your rights. You cannot own property. Your will is read, and your estate is distributed to your heirs. Your marriage is legally dissolved. You are, for all legal purposes, gone. Now, let us engage in a thought experiment. Imagine a person, let's call her Jane, is cryopreserved in our time. 200 years later, the technology for revival is perfected, and she is successfully brought back. Who is she? According to the law of her time, she is dead. She has no birth certificate that is valid in this new era, no social security number, no citizenship. The money she set aside in her will is long gone, having passed through generations of her family. The house she owned belongs to her great-great-great-grandchildren, who see her as a bizarre and unsettling ancestor returned from the grave. How does she prove who she is? How does she support herself? Would she be considered a new person, an immigrant from the past? Would she have any claim to her former identity or assets? The legal tangles are almost infinite. It would require a complete overhaul of our most basic legal concepts. Then there is the complex legal status of the cryonics organizations themselves. What are they? Are they funeral homes, disposing of remains? Are they medical facilities, caring for patients? Or are they long-term storage warehouses, guarding property? They exist in a murky space between these definitions. And what is their legal responsibility to their clients? They have a contractual obligation to maintain the preservation, to keep the liquid nitrogen topped up. But this is a contract meant to last for centuries. What happens if an organization goes bankrupt, as some early ones did? What happens if there's a catastrophic earthquake, a war, or a societal collapse that disrupts the supply of liquid nitrogen? Who is legally responsible for these frozen patients? If a preserved person is allowed to thaw due to negligence, has the organization destroyed property, or has it committed a form of negligent homicide? Our legal framework has no answers to these questions. Socially, the perception of cryonics remains deeply fractured. For most of the public, the idea is still firmly in the realm of science fiction. It's the premise of comedies like Futurama or action films like Demolition Man. These portrayals, while often entertaining, have the effect of trivializing the concept or painting it as inherently bizarre. This makes it difficult for cryonics to gain mainstream acceptance or to be taken seriously as a scientific endeavor. It's often viewed with a mixture of morbid curiosity, ridicule, and a degree of moral suspicion. The desire to live forever can be perceived as arrogant, selfish, or a sign of an unhealthy fear of death. The community of people who sign up for cryonics is often stereotyped as being composed of eccentric tech billionaires or socially awkward sci-fi fans. This perception creates a social barrier. Many people who have made cryopreservation arrangements choose to keep it a secret from their friends, colleagues, and even close family members to avoid difficult conversations, judgment, or ridicule. The story of James Bedford is a perfect microcosm of this social divide. To the small, dedicated community that believes in his cause, he is a hero, a courageous pioneer. To the rest of the world, he is largely a curious footnote in history, the answer to a trivia question, the first man to be frozen. But the profound social and legal questions raised by his silent journey are ones our society has only just begun to think about. So, where is James Bedford now, all these decades after his chilly, uncertain journey began? After the tumult of his first few years, being shuttled between makeshift storage locations under the care of Robert Nelson, his long, silent voyage found a permanent and stable harbor. Since 1991, he has been in the meticulous care of the Alcor Life Extension Foundation, located in a modern, secure facility in Scottsdale, Arizona. Alcor is one of the world's largest and most sophisticated cryonics organizations dedicated to the long-term, high-fidelity preservation of its patients. If you could visit the facility, you would not see a graveyard. You would see something that looks more like a clean, quiet, high-tech laboratory or a data center. The main patient care bay is filled with rows of large, gleaming stainless steel cylinders that reach towards the ceiling. These are the dewars. A dewar is essentially a giant, incredibly efficient thermos bottle built with a vacuum between an inner and outer wall to prevent heat transfer. Inside one of these dewars, submerged in a bath of crystal clear, intensely cold liquid nitrogen, rests the body of James Bedford. he is not alone. He is one of nearly 200 other patients currently in Alcor's care, each in their own individual container, each held in that profound stasis, each waiting. His maintenance is a matter of precise, unwavering routine. The primary task is simply to ensure that he remains at that constant, stable temperature of -196 degrees Celsius. The liquid nitrogen that surrounds him does slowly evaporate over time, a process called boil off. On a regular schedule, trained technicians come and top up the dewars with fresh liquid nitrogen from large, on-site storage tanks. The entire facility is monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with sophisticated systems that track temperature and liquid levels. There are backup generators and emergency plans to protect the patients against power outages, natural disasters, or any other conceivable disruption. The goal is to create a fail-safe environment that can be maintained not just for years or decades, but potentially for centuries. In May of 1991, Alcor had a unique opportunity. They needed to transfer Bedford from his older, less efficient capsule into a more modern, state-of-the-art dewar. This allowed them to briefly and carefully examine his external condition for the first time since his initial preservation in 1967. The observations were documented in detail. As expected, his rudimentary preservation had left its mark. His skin was discolored, and there were some visible cracks in the surface, likely due to the thermal stress of his early, less controlled cooling process. However, the overall assessment was positive from a preservationist's point of view. He appeared to be structurally sound and had not suffered any further degradation over the intervening 24 years. He was, by all accounts, stable. The pause button, which had been pressed in that Glendale nursing home so long ago, was holding fast. For the international cryonics community, James Bedford is a figure of immense symbolic weight. He is their touchstone, their pioneer, their Yuri Gagarin, who took the first step into a new frontier. His preservation date, January 12th, is celebrated annually as Bedford Day. It's a day for members of the community to reflect on the history of their movement, to honor the courage of its first volunteer, and to look with hope towards the future. His continued stable preservation for over half a century is held up as proof of concept. It demonstrates that long-term cryopreservation, at the very least, is logistically feasible. Of course, no attempt at revival has ever been made on James Bedford or on any other cryopreserved patient. No such attempt is even on the distant horizon. As we have explored, the technologies required to reverse the widespread damage of the preservation process, to cure the underlying disease that caused death, and to safely reboot a human mind, are still firmly in the realm of theoretical science. And so, James Bedford waits. He rests in the silent cold of the Arizona desert, a human time capsule. He is a message in a bottle that was successfully sealed and cast into the sea of time. But the ocean is vast and deep, and the shore of the future is an unknown and perhaps unreachable destination. His status remains unchanged, a patient in a hospital that is still waiting for its first doctors to be born. The story of James Bedford is a story from the past, a snapshot of science and hope from the 1960s. But the field he helped to pioneer has not stood still. While the ultimate goal of revival remains a distant, speculative dream, the science of preservation itself has continued to evolve and improve. Researchers today are actively working on solving the very problems that made Bedford's procedures so crude and damaging. The future prospects of cryonics, while still highly uncertain, are being built on a foundation of real, ongoing research in cryobiology, nanotechnology, and regenerative medicine. The single most significant advancement since Bedford's day has been the development and refinement of vitrification. Remember the great villain of our story, the ice crystal? Vitrification is the modern weapon against it. The word comes from the Latin vitrum, for glass, and that's precisely the goal, to turn the water inside the body's cells into a glass-like solid rather than crystalline ice. The process involves perfusing the body with a much more concentrated and sophisticated cocktail of cryoprotectants than the simple DMSO used on Bedford. Then, the body is cooled very rapidly. This combination of chemicals and rapid cooling forces the water molecules into a state of suspended animation before they have time to organize themselves into the destructive ordered lattice of an ice crystal. They are locked in place in their disordered, liquid-like arrangement, forming an amorphous, glass-like solid. When a tissue is successfully vitrified, its microscopic structure is preserved in exquisite detail. The cell walls are not punctured. The delicate internal machinery is held intact. This is a monumental leap forward from simple freezing. In laboratory settings, scientists have successfully vitrified complex biological systems. They have vitrified rabbit kidneys, thawed them, and successfully transplanted them into living rabbits, where the organs resumed normal function. This is a stunning proof of principle. It shows that vitrification can, under ideal conditions, preserve a complex organ without destroying it. However, the challenges of scaling this up perfectly to an entire human body, and especially the human brain, are still immense. Ensuring the vitrification solution reaches every single cell without causing toxic damage is an ongoing area of intense research for scientists at institutions like the 21st Century Medicine Research Company. Even with perfect preservation, you are still left with the problem of revival. This is where the hope of cryonicists shifts to other scientific frontiers. The most prominent of these is nanotechnology. The vision, as we've touched upon, is of future medical nanorobots, molecular machines that could repair the body on a cellular level. While this may sound like pure fantasy, scientists are already taking the first baby steps. Researchers like Dr. Robert Freitas have published detailed theoretical designs for such machines, grounding the futuristic vision in the principles of physics and chemistry. In parallel, the field of regenerative medicine is advancing at an astonishing rate. Scientists are learning to grow new tissues and even simple organs from stem cells. Perhaps the future of revival won't be about painstakingly repairing every old, damaged cell, but about using the perfectly preserved brain as a blueprint to regenerate a brand new healthy body around it. An even more radical proposed path to revival is that of mind uploading. Some futurists and computer scientists believe that it may eventually be possible to scan a preserved brain with such high resolution that we can map its entire connectome, every neuron and every synaptic connection. This vast data map, containing all the information of a person's mind, could then be used to create a perfect simulation of that person's consciousness inside a powerful computer. This uploaded mind could live a full life in a virtual reality of its own choosing, or perhaps even be downloaded into a sophisticated robotic body. This approach neatly sidesteps the messy biological problems of revival, but it opens up its own dizzying array of philosophical questions about identity and what it means to be real. It is crucial to hold all of these future prospects with a gentle, open, but skeptical hand. They are possibilities, not certainties. The mainstream scientific consensus remains that the successful revival of a cryopreserved human is not on the foreseeable horizon. But the story of James Bedford, in the end, is about more than just the science. It is a deeply human story. It is a story about hope in the face of despair, about defiance in the face of inevitability. It represents a timeless human impulse, our refusal to quietly accept the limitations we are born with. We are a species of explorers, of tool builders, of dreamers who have always pushed at the boundaries of what is considered possible. We built ships to cross oceans that were once believed to be the edge of the world. We built wings to soar through the skies. We have peered into the heart of the atom and out to the edge of the observable universe. James Bedford's icy gamble was, in its own way, another such voyage into the unknown. It was a final act of faith, not in a deity or an afterlife, but in the potential of future generations of human beings. He placed his trust in the scientists and thinkers of tomorrow. Whether that faith was well placed is a question that only the distant future can answer. For now, he remains a silent pioneer, a monument to the audacious, perhaps foolish, but profoundly human dream of a second chance. His story invites us not necessarily to believe in his quest, but to simply contemplate. To contemplate the incredible journey of human progress, to marvel at the enduring mysteries of life and consciousness, and to wonder about the undiscovered possibilities that may yet lie ahead, waiting for us in the futures we are all dreaming of. And now, as our own story for tonight comes to a close, we can appreciate the stillness, the quiet pause of the night, and the simple, profound peace of this present moment as you drift off to sleep.